Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Hit that like button as you come on the stream to boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. Reports are now that Israel, after much delay, has signed on to the Gaza peace plan touted by Donald Trump, but many suspect that the deal's lengthy implementation and vague points leave it vulnerable to collapse. Indeed, Israel is saying it will occupy over 50% of Gaza and has already shelled civilians returning home in the north hours after the deal was announced. The question is, can Netanyahu afford to end Gaza's carnage? Can Israel? What does it mean for wars being discussed and plotted by Israel in the U.S. elsewhere, like Iran? To discuss this and much more, I have joining me today friends of the show. We have Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, and overall a great analyst on geopolitics, author, etc. Scott, good to see you.
Good to be here.
We have Ray McGovern. He's a former CIA analyst and great geopolitical commentator in his own right. Ray, good to see you again.
Thank you, Danny.
And then we have Garland Nixon. Welcome back, Garland. He's an analyst and a commentator as well, hosts the Garland Nixon Show on YouTube. Welcome back, Garland.
Thanks for inviting me, Danny.
All right. And chats, let me know. Sharing screens lately has led to some audio issues. So immediately tell me if you hear, because we might not be able to hear the audio issues. So thanks so much for that. All right, gentlemen. So yeah, let's talk about the immediate news right now. And I wanted to start with you, Scott, on a point that not many people are talking about in terms of why Israel and why there is this ceasefire plan being implemented right now in Gaza. Just before this happened, Scott, Israeli media reported that Netanyahu's rivals were meeting in secret on how to topple the government by this winter. And many have noted, including yourself, that here's the screenshot. Israeli media has noted this, and they've said that parties, opposition parties, and figures like Lieberman, Golan, Naftali Bennett, and others have been meeting to topple the government. And I know you, Scott, have talked about Netanyahu's predicament as well as Israel's overall. How about we start with why this ceasefire, why this peace plan has been implemented and what people might be missing about it as the first phase begins?
Well, first of all, it's a plan that's long overdue. Netanyahu has held on to this conflict because it's in his political best interest to hold on to this conflict. He is in dire political straits on the domestic front. He has he leads a coalition which is not doesn't have peace in its DNA. Let's put it that way. But he's confronted with a political reality in the United States that if he doesn't do what Donald Trump asked him to do at this point in time, American support for Israel is rapidly slipping away. Trump has already publicly noted that Congress is not under the control of Israel the way it used to be. And the whole Charlie Cook, crisis, after Charlie was murdered, you don't have an Israeli prime minister go on TV, not once, but twice, saying, I didn't do it. We didn't do it, unless there's an underlying political fear that some people will think you did it. And why would he fear that? Because of, allegations that Charlie Kirk was turning away from Israel, along with a large part of the Christian Zionist, Christian evangelical movement that had long served as Israel's core foundation of support here in the United States. So Netanyahu, by continuing this conflict, may be preserving in the short term, a situation where he avoids being prosecuted in a court of law for corruption by remaining as prime minister. But he was setting up the conditions for the strategic defeat of Israel, and that would have also brought about his political demise. So he needed to find an off-ramp. And this peace plan, which I want to just quickly point out, is Hamas's demands that have been put in place since day one. So Hamas wins. And that's the other thing we have to recognize. Donald Trump simply packaged it and sold it. So now the question is, okay, so he's gone down this path and he's preserving his American foundation, but what about his coalition? I mean, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and others are threatening to jump ship. And if that happens, then Netanyahu is in trouble because his government collapses. He's no longer prime minister. He can be arrested and he'll die in prison. I think what we have here is an opportunity for Netanyahu to build a new coalition. He's going to have to dump the far right wing, and he can't survive politically without it. But this peace plan is linked to Netanyahu, and I think Trump can play some behind the scenes role. And I think there's a coalition that can be built, by some of the names that were mentioned, Benny Gantz especially, a coalition that can be built in Israel that allows Netanyahu to remain as prime minister for an interim period while this peace plan is being implemented and put forward. And that's also one way that Trump can control Netanyahu to ensure Israeli compliance, because now Netanyahu's political future, indeed his personal fortune, is dependent upon the success of this. And then once the treaty is solidified, it's run through its phases, Netanyahu can go into exile, receive some sort of, amnesty, et cetera. There's a political deal here because on the surface, this is not sustainable. His coalition can't survive. It's about to collapse. And left to his own volition, his political enemies are going to take advantage of that to topple him. So why would Netanyahu agree to this peace treaty? Because it might be the only off-ramp available to him for political survival.
Scott, quickly before I go to the others, you mentioned that this is Hamas's peace plan. Talk about some of those points, those demands that you said were things that Hamas has wanted, because there has been some concern on social media and other places, some even saying this is surrender. I definitely don't believe that, given how Hamas, I think, was saying that they were fighting up until the very last minute here. But what are these points that you'd like to just illuminate for the audience?
Well, the big thing is the end of the Israeli occupation. Look, let's just be very clear here. There's 1,200 Palestinians in Israeli prison today. One of the Hamas objectives will always get the release of these people, to include Barghouti, who's going to be released. Barghouti's been in prison for 20 years now? What's he going to see when he comes out? Because somebody asked me that question. What's he going to see? Ruined Gaza. I said, no, he's going to see Palestine. Barghouti's going to leave prison and set foot in Palestine. Hamas won. Hamas did what nobody else could do. Hamas brought Israel to a standstill. Israel had to accept this deal, and Palestine is being born because of it. And Barghouti's going to step on the soil of free and independent Palestine. That's a Hamas victory. Hamas also is, those are the big ones. No occupation, a Palestinian homeland, freedom to the people out. Hamas is a resistance movement, and this is where all the anti-Hamas people can just go pound sand. It's a resistance movement. It's not a terrorist organization. A resistance movement. And when you are no longer occupied, when you've achieved your goal, you don't need a resistance movement. You need a government. And if it was a surrender, there would be no role for Hamas in a future government. But notice the compromise, not that Hamas made, but that Trump made at the very end. Hamas isn't going away. Hamas will be part of this government. Oh, no. This is a Hamas victory. Now, we still need the peace plan to actually be implemented, and Israel's fully capable of screwing this up. There's a million things that can go wrong, and everything else has to go right. But the notion that this is Hamas surrender, you don't know anything about anything if you believe Hamas surrendered on this one. It's Israel that's made all of the compromise. This is Netanyahu's government. There will never be a Palestinian state. Oh, yeah? Well, guess what? There is now. Hamas will be destroyed. Not really. You couldn't do it. On and on. We can just go back and forth on this. The Palestinian people paid a horrible price. an unbearable price. But their children and their grandchildren will not be children of the camps. The camps are over. Palestine is real. That's a victory.
Garland, I want to get you in here. What's your thoughts about this developing situation? Please jump in.
Couple of things. Number one, what did Algeria lose? 6, 7, 8, 9 million people. A horrendous. I mean, look at the numbers here. Probably 500,000 or more. But I mean, we're looking at some unthinkable numbers. In hindsight and history, with terrible losses, etc., Algeria is an independent country, isn't it? And when you look at it, you'll say that terrible losses, they won. They fought for their freedom. Ask the Algerians if they would prefer that they had not fought and they're still under French rule. No, sadly, it's unfortunate. It's a reality. There are people that fight for their freedom and pay a terrible cost. I'll say this. What does the future look like for Israel? It will be a pariah nation. Who want to, certainly the governments in the West will push, big corporations to throw money in there. People won't want to buy stuff from Israel. Good luck, flying around the world with an Israeli passport and going to restaurants and people find out you're from Israel, you'll be a pariah. The future for Israel is not bright. It is dark. It is bleak. And the future for the Palestine is they paid a price. Provided, we got a long ways to go, provided that we can, maintain this ceasefire and turn it into a permanent, cessation of hostilities. Nothing's guaranteed. And now, if it is bad enough for Israel, they want to pick a fight with Iran and get themselves pummeled by Iranian missiles again. So it's possible, they're doing this so they can go tangle with Iran. But the future looks very, very dark for Israel, and it looks bright for the people of Palestine, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Ray, I definitely agree with Scott. Because of everything that's happened over the last several years leading up to this moment, there's certainly a bigger push now for a Palestinian state, and in fact, there could be a framework inside of this deal that could lead to that. But of course, many are suspicious about Israel. Israel is, of course, delaying things and are kind of behaving as they did at the first ceasefire plan at the beginning of the Trump administration. What do you see here as the important points to note as we move into this phase of what has been seemingly an endless war and genocide in Gaza and the region?
Well, Danny, I too agree with Scott, the way he outlined things. But I would emphasize his point that there's many a slip between cup and lip. I think the way he put it, where there are a million ways that Netanyahu can sabotage this or other people can. And so here I am, fresh from watching a most remarkable cabinet meeting in Washington, where every one of those sycophants gave adulatory commendation to the king for having succeeded in this latest deal with Israel and Palestine. Now, I believe that Netanyahu gave this to Trump, okay? So Trump could have a really big wing. Now, I remember earlier this year, something similar like that. Yeah, something very similar happened. And folks were saying, Netanyahu, now he can't possibly go back on this. It's a deal with Trump. Hey, how could, well, he did go back on it. So my fear is this will last very, very not long at all, and that we'll be back to where we were before. And the ephemeral boost in Trump's ratings will last for a couple of weeks, and then when they see what's really happening in Israel, Trump will not have the guts, he will not have the strength to defy Netanyahu from whatever he wants to do. So my suspicion is that Netanyahu has given this to Trump. It's been a big boost. Watch all the sickening sycophancy, flattering, adulation going on at that cabinet meeting this morning. And so Trump is riding high. And will he matter very much? Will it matter very much to him after 2 weeks if things falls apart? Well, it didn't last time. And will he abide by everything that Netanyahu asks him to do? Well, he did last time. So call me from Missouri, the show me state. I'll have to wait and have people show me that this is a real deal, that Netanyahu, in the first instance, is obliged in some sense to heed.
Yeah, good points. And back to you, Scott. I wanted to pull this up. There was a lot of pressure on Israel in particular, even coming from mainstream channels. Here you had the New York Times talking about Israel cannot go on winning like this. I don't know. It's a very faded title, but I can go to the quote I wanted to pull up. It says, in Israel, though, winning has seemed only to yield more rounds of warfare. Israel is not a victor, but a perpetual fighter. Talk about what might be meant by this, given all that's transpired. Of course, we could crystal ball what's going to happen in Gaza with a really high chance that things could turn out very badly from here on out after this peace deal. But there is this context of Israel's situation that I think many people miss, but the New York Times was reporting on. Actually, here's the quote. I keep forgetting to pull it up. In Israel, though, winning has seemed to only yield more rounds of warfare. Israel is not a victor, but a perpetual fighter. Your assessment?
Well, I mean, that's an accurate statement, except they're not winning. I mean, you're right. There are some victories. I mean, getting Hezbollah to sue for a ceasefire was a victory, but it didn't solve the issue of Hezbollah. Helping create the conditions for the downfall of Assad, victory, but it hasn't solved the issue there. Hamas, not even close to being a victory. Iran, 12 days of war, made for some good headlines, but the issue isn't solved. Netanyahu said the other day that Israel is more isolated today than it has ever been. And to put that statement in perspective, let's walk back to September 2023, before October 7th. I think it was the 12th. My brain might be off by a day or two or a week. But Joe Biden was in India for the G20 meeting, and he stepped forward and said, I am announcing the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. And this is going to be a grand and glorious thing. It's going to unite Europe with India through the Middle East, and it's going to bring Israel and Jordan and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, everybody together, one big happy family. And it's going to be wonderful. And Netanyahu came out the same day and literally said, this is the greatest day in modern Israeli history. Why? Because this was what made Israel viable. If this economic corridor went through, it created the potential for Israel to become, the financial and technological and economic hub of a rejuvenated, revitalized Middle East. And this would give Israel the economic independence it needed to be its own player, to live in peace and harmony. And Netanyahu was all over that. Well, that's dead. Isn't going to happen. Finished. Israel today is isolated. Netanyahu said so. He said, we'll have to learn how to be self-sufficient. But what a joke. Israel can't be self-sufficient. Israel is 100% relied upon the U.S. taxpayer and the largesse of the United States government, which means that Netanyahu is a prisoner of the United States. And the United States is tired of these wars. I mean, we're going to create our own war in Venezuela, a separate issue altogether, but that's a Western Hemisphere war. We're trying to walk away, de-link ourselves from Ukraine, from the Middle East, from Iran, from Taiwan. And Israel's a problem for us because all Israel does is just get embroiled in more and more conflict. But let's also take a look at what happened today. I guess it was yesterday, Vladimir Putin received a phone call from Benjamin Netanyahu, or maybe it was last week. I don't know. It was recently. They're just talking about it today. Ynet's reporting it. And Netanyahu, this is while Russia is just flowing in military equipment into Iran. And Netanyahu said, please pass to the Iranians. We don't want a war. We're not looking for a war. And this is against everything everybody's been talking about. I mean, the betting, the money if you were betting, was Israel's going to be attacking Iran, has to attack Iran. Even the Iranian president said in a session 2 weeks ago, he believes that Israel is going to attack. And now Netanyahu is saying, we're not going to attack. We're not. Now, is this subterfuge? And all that? I don't think so. I think we're dealing with a new reality where Israel has to adapt to the fact that by not winning decisively, it's just destroying. Israel is isolated. They don't have the ability to survive self-sufficiently. They need the United States. The United States isn't going to put up with these endless wars. And if you solve the Iranian problem, because Netanyahu told Putin we're ready for a solution, then you solve the Hezbollah problem. And then you can begin to solve the Israeli problem. And now you have Trump solving the Gaza problem. And maybe, while you can't recreate the Middle East, India, Middle East, European economic corridor, you can bring about a modicum of peace and stability that would allow Israel to try and figure out where it is. Because otherwise, if Israel is just basically the fly in the ointment when it comes to peace and stability, the United States is going to walk away from Israel. That's something that Benjamin Netanyahu fears more than anything else.
Yeah. And Garland, your thoughts, your assessment, because a lot of people, I mean, I've seen some, especially the Zionist elements all across social media and the media, claiming this is a major win for Israel, that they've gotten everything they wanted. What's your assessment?
Oh, no, I don't see any wins for Israel right now. I see Israel, they've lost on every front. As far as public relations is concerned, it's a pariah state. People around the world despise Israel, and I don't see how you can survive as a nation in the long term when, number one, most of the world hates you. The governments of the West still support them, but the people do not. That's number one. I think additionally, when your economy has come so unraveled that they've got a major problem, and that is, while everyone talks about Benjamin Netanyahu bragging that, I own the U.S. government and I own the U.S. They'll do anything I want. I've got all of this power in the U.S. But the other side of that is, now that Israel's losing everyone else, they're completely beholden to the U.S. government, that they have nothing else. Israel is effectively a welfare state of the U.S. government. So if things ever kind of start to change and adjust, wherein the U.S. government, because of pressure from the American people, can't be as openly, controlled by Israel, Israel's in a world of trouble because they have nowhere else to turn. What a terrible place to be, where you say, yeah, I control the U.S., but I got nothing else. Because if the U.S. ever drops me, I'm done. I wouldn't want to be in that position. So I don't think Israel's in a good position. And I'm agreeing with Scott in that while there's all the appearance that Israel wants to go to war with Israel, with Iran, everybody believes it. That's like the common agreement. Sure, Israel wants to go with Iran. When you look at it, they had a 12 to 14 hour jump on Iran before they got the first punch in, and they still got their clocks cleaned in 12 days. Iran has gotten stronger now. Iran has more information on how to deal with Israel. If Iran can look at Israel and say, in 12 days, I pretty much ran them out of anti-aircraft missiles. If I fire that amount in 3 days, they'll be out in 3 days. So they're in no position to go toe-to-toe. May they go toe-to-toe with Iran again? It would be a military debacle of historic proportions, and they may. I just don't see how they could possibly do it.
Yeah, and Ray, definitely want your maybe final comments on this section, on the peace deal, on the situation that led, the context that led to this, and anything else.
Oh, thanks, Danny. Sure, Netanyahu is a pariah. He's sort of driven into a corner here. And for a guy with nuclear weapons, that's really dangerous. Now, one thing is simply his political position in Israel. There is a prison with a bridal suite all prepared for Netanyahu and his wife. What happens if there is peace? Well, most people tell me that he ends up there in prison. Now, this is the kind of guy who does genocide. Do not blanch before the term. This is the kind of guy that does forced starvation. Okay. And by extension, Trump supports both. Now, let's say Netanyahu, in extremis, decides to brandish a nuclear weapon vis-a-vis Iran on the spurious claim that Iran is very, very close to a nuclear weapon. What is Trump going to do? Well, I don't know what Bibi Netanyahu has on Trump, but I suspect strongly that he also has a lot of blackmail material, Epstein and so forth. And that also, with a person like Trump, who also supports genocide and forced starvation, well, it looks like they're bound at the hip. So that's what creates for me a unknowable, really, really dangerous situation now. Hopefully, the latest trends with the Russian and the Chinese coming in and support big time for Iran, there's less likelihood that Israel will strike out. But if they strike out, well, you've got people like Kellogg and people like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and others that reassure Trump, look, it'll be the same as last time. We can give the Iranians a really bad assassination survey or blow. And then what happens next? Well, as Garland has already said, last time around, the Israelis had to get Daddy Trump to bring them out of the impasse here because they were going to almost get obliterated. Pardon the word. So there's so many loose ends here that the only thing that I would leave people with is this is so volatile that American people need to make known that we don't want any part of genocide or forced starvation, or worse still, Netanyahu doing something partly for his own political and personal reasons and getting Trump to go along with it.
Yeah, great points. And Scott, let's talk about Iran actually, because there has been, I think, a lot of chaos around this particular question, with some even wondering if this ceasefire in Gaza is a prelude to focusing more on this front. Of course, on Ben Shapiro's show, everyone's favorite Zionist commentator, Netanyahu, had this to say, basically selling war to especially those who support Donald Trump.
Iran is developing now ballistic missiles that are intercontinental ballistic missiles for 8,000 kilometer range. What does that mean? They add another 3,000 kilometers, and they've got under their atomic guns, the New York City in target, Washington, Boston, Miami, Mar-a-Lago. Okay.
All with a smile on his face as he talks about that. And then there's some recent news, though. So according to Israeli-backed Iran International, we have the Iranian VP saying that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told him that since the 12-day war had ended, efforts to top the Islamic Republic have actually ended. And this would go to your point, Scott, about how there's a lot of worries about restarting this conflict on the part of both the U.S. and Israel. But, of course, you had Trump threatening to bomb Iran if it restarts its nuclear program. And all indications are that there is still enrichment going on for Iran, whether it meets those thresholds that justified the bombing the first time. Who I do not know. But, Scott, comment on this. What is the risk of war with Iran? What would be the consequences, especially now that Iran has also been redoubling its efforts to defend itself to a more effective degree? And maybe you can also talk about that. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Scott, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry.
I was keeping Maverick out of the commentary. Yes, Maverick had something to say about Ray, and I was like, no, not today, man. But we'll start with something that needs to be said right off the bat. Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons. There is no nuclear weapons program in Iran. there was a lot of people in the lead up to the 12-day war who said that Iran should have a nuclear bomb, that this would prevent a military strike. And then once Israel engaged, they said, this is it. Iran has no choice but to build a nuclear weapon. And that's just, it's an attractive argument. I mean, because clearly ballistic missile-based deterrence didn't work, did it? But it did. But the Iranian president, again, in a session 2 weeks ago, made it as crystal clear that Iran doesn't want a nuclear bomb. Iran doesn't need a nuclear bomb. Iran doesn't desire a nuclear bomb. Iran is not pursuing a nuclear bomb. And this is policy. This isn't fatwa. Fatwa is different. Fatwa is the religious edict sent forth by the supreme leader that creates a religious obstacle to a bomb. But the thing about the fatwa is that one could say Iran wants a nuclear bomb, but they can't because of the fatwa. What I'm telling you right now is it doesn't matter if there's a fatwa or not. Iran doesn't want a nuclear bomb. Iran isn't pursuing a nuclear bomb. So let's take that off the table for all those people out there who say that Iran must have a nuclear bomb. Because guess what? Ballistic missile-based deterrence worked. Why do you think Netanyahu picked up the phone and begged Daddy to stop the war? Because Iran's ballistic missiles were knocking the snot out of Israel. And had the war continued, the missile shield would have collapsed further. Iran would have been out even better weapons, and that would have been the end of Israel. So Iran doesn't need this. Iran has identified the weaknesses in its system. Interestingly enough, based upon reports out of Iran, the notion that Israel knocked out Iran's air defense systems early on in the conflict appears to be a little far-fetched. What happened is that the Mossad set up these drone networks of covert operatives, using drones that were either supplied to Iran or built in a factory that the Israelis installed. They ran around in these little pickup truck type contraptions, and they were hitting Iranian air defense systems and taking them out. And it appears that the Iranians, once they realized that this was happening, they pulled their air defense back to preserve as much of their infrastructure as possible, because they didn't have a solution to the drone problem yet. But now the drones are over. The hundreds of Mossad agents that were doing this, many of them were foreigners. They're dead, hung by the neck until dead. And the drone factories have been identified, dismantled. Israel doesn't get to play that game again. And now the air defense systems that were withdrawn, not destroyed, are in place, and they're being reinforced by, it appears, by more air defense systems being brought in from Russia, from China, a truly integrated air defense system. This is new, and the Israelis would have to confront this. Russia has, there was a deal where Russia was going to provide advanced MiG-29 aircraft and Su-35 aircraft. The delivery of that was going to begin sometime in 1926 to 29. Well, today, advanced MiG-29s are flying over Tehran. These aren't export versions. The Russians basically took frontline Russian fighters and gave them to the Iranians to fill that gap, while Russia is resolving the issue of getting the Iranians spun up on the Su-35s. But there are now aircraft defending Iranian airspace. That wasn't the case during the 12 days. Israel was able to fly through Syria into Azerbaijan and into the Caspian Sea and bomb Tehran, Parchan, and other industrial targets from the unprotected east. Not going to happen again. That gap's been filled. The Iron Dome still doesn't work. There's no upgrade you can do. There's no, there's no technician. You can't call the IT specialist, come in and say, "Hey, let's run the most current version. We need Iron Dome 3.2." No, you got what you got, and it doesn't work. The Iranian missiles, by the way, do work, and there were many of their newest models that didn't get flown. And if there is a war, Iran's going to front load the strikes against Israel with these new models. And the damage that was being done in the end that caused Israel to pick up the phone and beg Daddy Trump to stop the war, that damage will be done up front. So let's make it clear. Israel can't hurt Iran the way they did at the beginning of the 12-day war, and Iran can pummel Israel from day one. The United States, if we stuck our noses in this, our bases would be hit by those same missiles, and the American air defense systems aren't anything like what we put over Israel. There is no Iron Dome for the American bases. They're sitting ducks. And so the United States isn't looking for a war. Israel's not looking for a war. Iran doesn't want a war. So I'm confident that this war, this Iranian-Israeli conflict can be avoided. The big question here is Iran's nuclear program. But one thing's for certain, Iran will never enter into negotiations staring down the barrel of a gun. They've made that clear. If they are going to enter into negotiations, the military aspect has to be taken, meaning the threat of military action has to be taken off the table. Iran is also probably going to demand for some sort of sanctions relief to get back to the JCPOA. So this Security Council action needs to be reversed. Europe needs to get on board. And I think Iran is holding some cards now because there's no military threat that can work. And Iran does have the support of Russia and China. And the longer this goes on, the stronger Iran gets. I will also say something that came out of the meeting 2 weeks ago, the 60% enriched uranium. I viewed this as as making Iran a nuclear threshold state. And logically it does. It's just a very short enrichment process using advanced centrifuges that Iran possesses to turn 60% into weapons-grade uranium. And if you listen to the statements made by many people in Iran, including people close to the supreme leader, people in parliament, former officials, they said that Iran has everything it needs for a nuclear weapon but the political decision. But what the Iranian president said is that political decision will never be made, because Iran doesn't want a nuclear bomb. There are people in Iran, just like there are people in the chatter sphere, who say Iran must have it. But the political leadership has been consistent. Iran doesn't want a bomb, doesn't need a bomb, will not pursue a bomb. And this is independent of the religious aspect of it. The 60%, then you say, why do you have it? Well, the reason why Iran went to 60% is because Israel took out the Natanz facility. People may have forgotten about the Israeli sabotage that destroyed 4,000 centrifuges in Natanz. How does Iran respond to this? The way they responded to it was to step up the enrichment. The 60% enriched uranium, yes, is one step away from being enriched into weapons grade, but it's also could be diluted instantly. I mean, this 60% could be brought down to 3.5% with absolutely no problem whatsoever. It can go away tomorrow if sanctions are lifted, if a deal could be made. So it's a chip that's out there, but it doesn't position Iran to be a nuclear threshold state, because Iran has basically said that's just something we're not going to do. So I don't think the 60% uranium is now the same level of threat and concern that it was psychologically beforehand, because there's a lot more clarity today about why Iran went to 60% and how quickly Iran is willing to get rid of that 60%. And the fact that Iran isn't pursuing a nuclear bomb, doesn't want to pursue a nuclear bomb, believes that they have absolutely no need for a nuclear bomb. Iran's secured by its conventional ballistic missile force. That's all they need to worry about.
Scott, quickly, before I get to Ray, because he's holding up something I definitely want him to show. I wanted to ask you about the Russia and China military support in particular, because some have messaged me actually saying, oh, will Iran confront the same problems, let's say, a Ukraine confronts when it's handed military equipment like air defense systems? What's your thoughts on that as a weapons inspector?
So the implication that is that Russia is America?
Oh, no, the implication is that Iran may have difficulties incorporating military technology,
integrated,
et cetera. Integrated,
First of all, what are they integrating? This isn't Soviet era air defense. I mean, the Iranians have some of that, but the Iranians have built a lot of their own indigenous air defense. They have an Iranian architecture. And I believe that this Iranian architecture was designed to plug in and plug out Russian and Chinese capabilities. So I think the system's been built with the idea of integrating Russian systems in mind. And Iranian engineers are in Russia. I would imagine that if you went to some of the institutes in Russia that are, linked to command and control, air defense, integration, and all that. You'll see that there's some Iranians walking around there. And I think if you travel the streets of Tehran, you'll see some Russians, in hotels that are being driven back and forth to the Iranian, Air Force headquarters. I think the Russians and the Iranians are working very closely on this. They have now, ratified that security agreement that wasn't ratified. I was like, where were the Russians? Well, Iran had to ratify it. Iran didn't. They did now. The deal's in place. The Russians are living up to their obligation. And the proof is that Russia accelerated delivery of advanced MiG-29s. These aren't export models. This isn't stuff Russia said, oh, wait till it comes off the production line. Iran said, we need them now. And Russia pulled off frontline fighters, Russian fighters in service with the Russian Air Force, and transferred them to the Iranians. That shows you how serious Russia is about this.
Yes, and Ray, I want you to jump in. Your comments.
How close is Iran to getting a nuclear weapon? Well, what people need to know if they can see this thing, if there's a crisis, it will be a manufactured crisis. My friend Gareth Porter wrote a book 16, 17 years ago, The Untold Story of the Iran Nuclear Scare. And you remember this picture of Netanyahu. You certainly remember that. Watch it carefully now. He's doing percentages of enrichment. Enrichment is not to be conflated with working on a nuclear weapon. Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. So here's the deal. The intelligence community, under the influence of pro-Israeli people, in the 90s were asked, how close can Iran be to a nuclear weapon? They said, about 5 years. And then 5 years later, they said, probably about 5 years. And next year, they said, maybe 4 or 5 years. And finally, after the Iraq debacle, where intelligence was fixed, manufactured around the policy of attacking Iraq, somebody sensible said, let's get an honest estimate on how close Iran has gotten to a nuclear weapon. Now, long story short, and I've said this before, an estimate was done. It was under the supervision of the head of the previous head of the State Department Intelligence Agency, INR. Tom Finger was his name, and was honest. And it said Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on it. And besides, that was a fatwa. Fatwa, sort of more serious than an encyclical or some other religious pronouncement that forbids it, okay? Now, as recently as March of this year, Tulsi Gabbard reiterated that judgment and reiterated the fact that the Supreme Leader gives no indication that he's going to reverse himself on the fatwa. Now, fatwas are hard to understand for us Westerners, but apparently the Iranians take it very seriously. If it's going to be reversed, the chances are it will have to be debated in their parliament and approved by the national. It will be openly proclaimed as being lifted. It hasn't been lifted. Bear in mind that during the long war of Iraq against Iran, during which we supported Iraq in all manner of ways, including intelligence, pinpoint intelligence, Iran, although it had chemical weapons, was enjoined against using them, and Iran didn't use them, no matter what these reports say that they may have. Okay, so these are important things. And what I'm saying here is that when Gareth Porter wrote this book, okay, he determined that Iran never had worked on a nuclear weapon. That was all made up stuff by the intelligence community. And he asked Tom Finger about this, and Tom said, well, at least we know that they stopped in 2003, okay? So it's a red herring. And the big thing that American audience should take away from this is they're trying to confuse you. Here it is, 70% enrichment. Now we have 80% or 60%. My God, how close they are. It doesn't matter. The enrichment is one thing. A nuclear weapon development is another. One caveat here. Ted Postal a very well-respected scientist who worked for the he was the right-hand man to the chief of naval operations back in the day. He says that the weapon can be constructed in an apartment house and it could be done very closely. I don't know if that's true or not, but that is the caveat I have to adduce now. As far the rest of the stuff, I would just emphasize is, yeah, they have enrichment, and Scott has well described the enrichment up to that degree has been a bargaining chip, really. Maybe not such a smart bargaining chip, as Scott has indicated, but enrichment is not working on a nuclear weapon. And you could take to the bank what Scott said. They're not working on a nuclear weapon. That's big. So if there's a crisis, it's a manufactured crisis.
Yeah, Garland, I definitely want your own assessment here, and I just want to add this. You know, of course, the nuclear question is the development question is a much different question, but the Ayatollah Khamenei has actually lifted all limits on missile range in their development with what Scott was talking about, the ballistic missile deterrence. Your comments on all of this as the debates around a renewed round two of a U.S.-Israel war on Iran continues.
Well, I'll put it like this. Iran has nuclear missiles in the same way that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, in the same way that Venezuela is, that President Maduro is the El Chapo of Venezuela. They're all simply lies cooked up by the U.S. empire so they can attack a country. And it's not an accident. The last I heard, I think Iran has the fourth or fifth largest oil reserve in the country, and Venezuela has number one. Those things are not, inconsequential to the decisions of the U.S. empire. Really, yes, we can and should discuss the issue of Iran's, the accusations against Iran. Regarding development of a nuclear weapon. But the truth is that the U.S. is just cooking up a lie. Israel, their proxy, whatever you want to look at, they're just both cooking up lies for the next war. In the same way that, there was an unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. China, wants to take out Taiwan for no reason other than they just, I don't know, they hate the island or they just want more land, whatever the case may be. There's always a lie that's cooked up to invade, harass, and steal the resources of other countries. So now that's all that is. That's all this is. Part of it could be they want to kind of back away from the Palestinian issue because they want to go steal all the oil in Venezuela. So they've got their war over there they want to start. But the truth is, it's interesting because there was a time when Donald Trump was, reminding everyone and getting heat, so-called heat from the mainstream, media and the mainstream politics, because he was saying out loud, George Bush cooked up a lie. George Bush lied us in a war. And now he has become George W. Bush. And now the same lies of weapons of mass destruction are being used for Iran. The same lies of drug dealing, they're being used for Venezuela. So in reality, we now see it wasn't George W. Bush. Let's not forget all the lies under Obama about Libya and Muammar Gaddafi. It wasn't Bush. It wasn't Obama. It wasn't Trump. In a way, it was, in that they are expressions of the U.S. empire. But that's all we have going on now. It has nothing to do with if it actually had anything to do, if U.S. foreign policy against Iran had anything to do with nuclear weapons or the development of nuclear weapons, this would be really easy to resolve. But since it doesn't, there's no way to resolve a lie.
Yeah, Garland, I know you have some time constraints, so I definitely want your comments on this before I bring it to the other guests, our other esteemed guests. So Iran has actually announced that it's discovered a major gas and oil deposits in the Pazan field. It says if 70% of recovery rate is applied to them, some 7 TCF of gas could eventually be extracted, roughly 17 to 18 years of output. Now we know Iran's independence is one of the reasons why there is always ongoing hostilities toward it. What do you make of this development, and how do you see if the war against Iran is not going to continue now, do you see it happening in the near future?
Oh, is that me?
Yeah, to you, because
Well,
I know you have
I'll
some
put it
time
like
constraints
this.
in
I'm
it.
sorry. I think the plan is there. The plan is if they don't attack Iran now, maybe they go take out Venezuela and they get all of their oil, and that makes them more powerful. They can now control the oil market a little bit more. They can resolve some of our economic issues by, stealing all the war or the oil and selling it. I think that's the plan. But I think any long-term U.S. plans are going to run into reality in that they're facing a catastrophic defeat in Ukraine. And there's no way to cheat that. There's no way to get out from under that. And that will, the defeat in Ukraine will change the ground under the U.S. hegemony around the world. And so I think that they're trying to do some things and hold off the defeat in Ukraine. So the question is, how soon does this catastrophic defeat in Ukraine manifest itself? Because when that happens, NATO falls apart, which NATO is, has one foot in the grave and the other on a patch of ice right now, as France's political situation is falling. So I think these things are inextricably tied to the defeat of NATO and the U.S. in Ukraine and the, afterwards, the way the world reacts to that.
Yeah, Scott, your comments. Are you there? Oh, sorry. I thought you were muted.
Oh, there you go.
I'm not muted. The dogs are cooperating for the moment. About Iran's oil discovery.
The discovery, and if there isn't aims for a war right now, do you see it coming in the near future?
No, no. This discovery of oil, discovery of gas is going to be ongoing. This isn't a game changer. It gives Iran, more reserves. It gives Iran, potential to, extract, exploit, make money. But this doesn't change the strategic balance in the Middle East any way, any more than, say, Israel's discovery of the Leviathan gas fields off of its coast dramatically changed things. People will be discovering oil reserves and gas reserves for many, many, many years to come, and we're not going to go to war because of that. I think it's not so much about the energy, but the energy security. How do we guarantee that these resources that the nations in the Middle East have can be brought to market in predictable, sustainable fashion? And this is where a multipolar world starts to dictate. This is no longer about the Carter Doctrine, where the United States is guaranteeing the security of the region through its military force. Though that ship has sailed. This is about engendering stability, not just military stability, but economic stability. Get to bring in these supply chains. The best way to guarantee that oil and gas flow is to guarantee that economies function. Look what happened to energy security during the pandemic when economies shut down. I mean, we saw oil get flipped where normally you have to pay money for people to store your oil. The people storing oil, they couldn't get rid of it. It was just it was done because there wasn't a demand for it. The world needs to keep demand going, and demand is diminished by conflict. And so I think actually the discovery of energy actually creates the potential in a multipolar world, which is where we're transitioning to for less war, not more war.
Yeah, and Ray, your final comments on this before we move on.
Well, I just say that I remember 20 years ago there were Zionist folks in the White House and the Pentagon who were saying, Iraq, we'll do Iraq, but real men go to Tehran. Okay. Now, luckily, all those Zionists have gone. Wrong. They're still around. My God. And Bibi Netanyahu still has great influence on our president. So I think everything Scott has said is reassuring and should be what sensible people take into account. But I fear, as adolescents say these days, and I'm talking about my grandchildren, uh, Putin is not okay. He's not okay. If you watch, as I did, watch the cabinet meeting this morning, he held forth for 40 minutes about just about anything, but it was written down. So he had somebody wrote this stuff down. It was gibberish, okay? And then he called on various people to say, oh, we adore you, we bless you, we think you're the greatest thing since minced meat or whatever, because you did this great thing on Iraq. So, great thing on Israel, Palestine. Now, so what am I saying? I'm saying Putin's looking at this, as is Xi Jinping, and they're saying, my God, he really is not okay. Okay. So what are we going to do? My God, well, don't piss him off, for God's sake. He has his fingers on the codes. See if you can play along with him. Maybe he'll be sensible. Maybe people like Witkoff and others will prevail. So all I'm saying is that those Zionists that were around before Iraq were more than 50% responsible, in my view, in retrospect, for the attack on Iraq. They're still around. They've done some other stuff like Libya and Lebanon and Syria and all that stuff, but they haven't done Iran yet, and they're out to do it. And do we have the power to do it? Oh, of course, we're the USA America. Okay, so that's my only caveat on that. I've probably said enough.
Yeah, well, great points, Ray. Well, let's now move to the Ukraine situation, if we can. So I want to first bring up some comments. You know, there has been a bit less enthusiasm coming from Russia of late when it comes to U.S.-Russia talks, because of especially the situation with flirting with sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine that Trump has done. Says he's sort of made a decision. It's very vague. We don't know what it is exactly. But here is what Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, said recently to the media about the situation between Russia and the United States. He said, I would say this is a very serious escalatory step, referring to the Tomahawk missiles. Indeed, the appearance of such systems, if it comes to that, would signify a substantial, one could even use the term qualitative change in the situation, but this will not affect our determination to achieve the set goals. So, Scott, you know, there have been comments from other lawmakers, Putin, they've all said that this would be a serious escalation, and that you know, the momentum, according to Ryabkov, of the Alaska summit has waned. What exactly is going on here when it comes to this conflict? Why is it, too, that we also see a lot of enthusiasm coming out of the Western mainstream media? I don't know if you've caught it. A lot of, oh, well, now Ukraine can push Russia back. Now Ukraine is in the driver's seat. Can you help dispel all of this for us? What's going on here?
Well, first of all, you said other lawmakers, and then you mentioned Vladimir Putin's name. He's not an other lawmaker. He's the president of the Russian Federation. And, you know, basically, while, you know, he consults and takes advice, it's his word that matters more than any other word. And pretty much what Ryabkov said was exactly what Vladimir Putin said during his presentation at Valdai. And just to go ahead and reinforce the point that it's the president's word that counts. Ryabkov may have declared Alaska dead. Ushakov just came out in the last hour and said, no, Alaska's alive and while I'm living, very much alive. And that Trump and Putin continue to talk. You know, Ray and I have been going back and forth. You guys haven't seen it, about the Tomahawk missiles and things of that nature. And, you know, I am more of a literalist, meaning that when I hear a president say, I have made a decision to send Tomahawks, I'm like, well, I guess the president made a decision to send Tomahawks. And, you know, when I hear people talking about, you know, the consequences, I say, well, you know, perception creates its own reality. The perception of the president ready to send Tomahawks creates a reality in Russia, back and forth. But Ray, and ever the wise man, it says, well, we sort of need to deal with reality here. Can they send tomahawks? I mean, it's one thing, Scott Ritter has been saying, as my wife will tell you, not so much recently, but I would every summer, at the end of summer, honey, this is it. This is the year. I'm going to train hard. We're going to save the money, and I'm climbing Mount Everest in May. I'm going on an Everest expedition. I mean, that was my dream, to do that, get physically fit enough to do that and all that. And but me saying I wanted to go Mount Everest didn't make it happen, because there were many things that had to happen that weren't going to happen, and therefore I was never going to get on the top of Mount Everest. And Ray's probably right. Tomahawks will never be delivered to Ukraine because there's just so many things that have to happen. And if you listen to what Ushakov said, I think Ray's even more right. Again, I'm not going to be dismissive of it. I'm somebody who believes that just the mere threat of sending tomahawks is a destabilizing move, and it's best that we not threaten in that manner. But, Trump likes to stir up the pot and create pressure and things of that nature. And the pressure about the tomahawk, it cuts two ways. I mean, it's not just about a threat to Russia, but it's also a signal to Ukraine and Europe about their collective impotence. Because if they're putting so much hope on a weapon that can never be delivered, it means that there is no hope at all. And Trump needs to drive that point home. And I think that point has been driven home decisively in the last week, which is why suddenly Ushakov is coming out saying, no, we're talking. Everything's cool. No, Alaska, on track. We're moving towards to peace. I think the whole tomahawk thing was just smoke and mirrors. I think it's just Donald Trump going in, stirring up the pot, seeing where things go. And the pressure wasn't designed to be put on Russia, which is one of the reasons why Putin sort of low-keyed it. I mean, he made the obvious statements. Yeah, if you do this, we got light at the end of the tunnel, but, that'll shut down. But you didn't see Putin, get serious face, pound the table, threaten, lash out. Putin was like, it's an old system. We're familiar with it. We could shoot it down, and calm. That implies that Putin knows something we didn't know. And apparently what we did know is that there's ongoing conversations. Normally when Putin and Trump speak, it's a big deal. I think now they've gone into the quiet mode. I think Trump is in the business of walking away from Ukraine. I think Trump's in the business of making sure that Ukraine and Europe understand the consequences of this and the lack of viability of any other option other than coming to terms with Russia that are acceptable to Russia. And that's the direction we're heading. Ushakov's statement makes it appear to be just that. And then, of course, Kirill Dmitriev, who, he's this guy who, has been working with Steve Witkoff. He's been at all these meetings. He's a confidant of Putin. And he's just been this cheerleader. I'm watching the world go to hell. And then I'm following Kirill Dmitriev, and I'm going, dude is just tweeting positive stuff. I mean, he's out, and I'm like, is he on cocaine? What's going on? Well, apparently Kirill knew things I didn't know, like Putin and Trump are talking. And Kirill's just standing there going, it's all okay. Don't worry about it. World coming in. Nah, it's all right. Putin and Trump are talking. He didn't say that, but the implication was everything's going to be okay. And Ushakov's statement implied, I think that's the direction we're heading here. Trump had to get himself out of a hole that he dug himself into about being able to end the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. He needed Europe to wake up to the reality. He couldn't have 7 people flooding the Oval Office every time he made a move on Ukraine. He needed the Europeans to wake up and go, it's hopeless. I mean, look at Macron. I mean, he may not be around much longer. The Brits, they're a joke. Germany, a basket case. Kallas finally woke up and realized after Trump told Zelensky, you saw Zelensky's face, hey, why don't you take back the 1991 borders? Really? And while you're at it, take Moscow. Oh, Trump's my friend. And then he went to the press. Trump's listening to me. He's listening to what I said, and he believes what I say. And we're going to do all it's going to be great. And Kallas came out and went, what I heard was that Trump just washed his hands of Ukraine and has walked away. And he's put all the burden on Europe, and we can't do this. We can't do this. And that's the reality that came in. I'll leave it at that because I've droned on. So I'll make sure next time I talk, I bring up something very important that happened this last week. I mean, game-changingly important that actually contributes to this talk. But I see Trump. I don't see all gloom and doom right now. I think that we're being gamed, and Ray called it. I mean, Ray, kudos to you, man. You called it. You said this is a game. This Tomahawk thing's not real. It's a game. And it appears that this Tomahawk thing's not real. It's been a game.
Well, there's also wrong article. There is some proof also that even the West is admitting to this, to your point, Scott. As the Telegraph says, Ukraine prepares for delivery of Tomahawk missiles. They can't fire. They're supposed to be leverage, but it could take months, and they might never leave their launchers because they have nothing to shoot them with. So there's that, and here is the quote here. And so just getting to you, Ray, your assessment, your reaction to the overall situation vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Well, Major Ritter, I salute you for acknowledging our conversations and for listening and for also contributing greatly. Captain McGovern signing off. Now, in all seriousness, serious intelligence analysts compare notes, okay? They don't go off half-cocked. And the really good ones listen. So we've had this dialogue, and increasingly over the last couple of days, it seemed that this is really a canard, a red herring. It'll play out both. Well, the important thing is the Russians keep speaking in the subjunctive mood, okay? If, you have Lavrov, you have Ryabkov, you got Putin himself. If you're all very conditional, and Lavrov 5 days ago said, "Look, it's my information that a decision has been made yet." So, and then you have Zakharova, Maria Zakharova, the presidential spokeswoman, saying, I don't know about this guy Kellogg. I mean, doesn't he work for the president? I mean, isn't he subservient to? Doesn't he abide by the policy that's been set? We're set on progress and peace. What's going on here? So it's very clear. Now, I'm going to suggest something very unusual, and that is that Trump is following Marxist-Leninist slogans here. Lenin said famously, "Revoluция проходит zigzagami." Zigzagami, got the zigzag, okay? The revolution proceeds with zigzags. And so this is the way rhetoric started in Russia, and the way it is today. Trump will say one thing one day, he'll say another thing the other day. That's why we had to wait at least 3 days or 4 days to figure out if this was real. Now, the real thing is that the Tomahawks are not real. The other real thing is that Putin is waiting for an official statement from Trump as to whether Trump will agree to his proposal, Putin's proposal, to have a kind of moratorium on further development, something that would approach the same limits as the START treaty, which cannot be renewed, expires on the 5th of February. Now, one of the most interesting things that Ryabkov said yesterday in that interview was the following. Russia does not associate the issue of Tomahawk deliveries to Kiev with the new START proposal toward the U.S. Quote, "These are two separate matters," end quote. That's good, okay? So one is a red herring, the other one is damn real, okay? Now, will Trump be able to be sensible and say, all right, look, we know you guys make a lot of money there by developing new missiles. We're going to keep this cap on the strategic missiles, so we're going to keep it for another year. Will he be strong enough to do that? Well, my guess is he will be. He'll face lots of opposition, but I think he will be. And if that happens, this is a major step forward. Then other things can get done. Ryabkov bemoaned the fact that, we have contact sometimes every day, but nothing gets done. There's not even an agreement on when we meet together to discuss bilateral relations and how to improve them, how to deal with Russian assets being seized in the United States under Obama. What about airlines and all that kind of stuff? So what Ryabkov is saying that is, look, we have an edifice that has been built here. Zakharov says it's just at the nascent, just the beginning, and then he says, well, it's cracking. Says Ryabkov, it's cracking and it's collapsing, and right out front, the Americans are to blame for this. The Europeans are to blame for the stuff in Ukraine, but the Americans are to blame. So this is Ryabkov. The cracks have now reached the foundation. So you have a zig. He says, look, we're getting to the point where we're not going to be diddled anymore on Ukraine or anything else, but please take us seriously on New START. And then you have Ushakov, who's the closest to Putin on this. He's his right-hand person on strategic arms and lower or intermediate nuclear forces. He's saying, no, look, Ryabkov is just saying we really like to get started. We're going ahead here with pursuing the agreements reached in Alaska. And that's big because before there were no contacts. At least there are contacts now. If the balloon goes up in Iran or Israel, there will be contacts. Lavrov will get through to, what's the guy's name, Rubio, as he was unable to get through to Blinken or Sullivan. And that's a big deal. And the summit has happened. Now, the outstanding invitation, last thing I'll say here, the Russians have been saying this repeatedly over the last 2 weeks. Look, we still hope that Trump will come to visit Moscow for the next summit. Now, there's an alternative there, and let me suggest it on air. Putin could say, look, let's just 5 of you come to Sochi. Come to Sochi and we'll have sort of an informal discussion, 5 on our side, 5 on your side, and you'll see Sochi. Sochi's not a backwater place out there. You'll see what Sochi is now, and we'll get together. And so that's my notion about what might happen next. Nothing real formal, but something that gets Trump to Russia and lets him see for himself not only Moscow, but the rest of the country, and have serious talks in a more discursive, a more relaxed manner over some vodka or over Diet Coke and vodka in Sochi. My recommendation, in case any of you at the White House are listening.
Well, Scott, certainly to your point earlier too, you said Putin, Ushakov, these figures, of course, they're the final word. Of course, there's a whole range of voices about this Tomahawk issue in particular, but I think this one is kind of for just an obvious one, that the response, if anything, were like this to happen, given that both of you said it's fantasy. And I believe that, given how long it's taken for even a non-decision to be made about it. But Andrei Kartapolov said, he's a head of Russia's parliament's defense committee, our response would be tough, ambiguous, measured, and asymmetrical. We will find ways to hurt those who cause us trouble. But Scott, how much of this desperation around throwing around weapons, keeping the conflict going, especially on the part of NATO, how much of this signals things aren't going very well right now? Because I look at the mainstream media and all I see is Ukraine's hit this, Ukraine's hit that, Ukraine is in the driver's seat. But this behavior seems to indicate something a little different. What's going on here?
Well, this is a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about. Since the special military operation began, outside observers, analysts like myself have been confounded by why Russia allows NATO to send weapons into Ukraine unmolested. Why does Russia allow Lvov and other Western Ukrainian cities to become sort of a holding ground for not just weapons, but lately weapons production capabilities. Factories are being built. And why aren't they bombing it? And then the question comes up, does Russia really have as much control over Ukrainian airspace as, we've been led to believe? It sounds to me like, Ukraine has built a protective umbrella of integrated air defense. Why are F-16s able to operate out of Western Ukraine? Aren't these things supposed to have been destroyed on day one by the vaunted Russian military? And it's one of those questions that just couldn't be answered. I mean, the answer was, well, maybe Russia's not as good as we thought they were. Maybe the Patriot's better than we thought it was. I don't think that could be the case, but who knows? And that seemed to be the direction, which then points to the potential of a long-term conflict, which is the exact opposite of the strategic direction that Russia wants to go. Russia's not looking to have a forever war. Russia wants this war to end on terms favorable to Russia. But if Russia allowing NATO to install defense industrial capacity in Western Ukraine and to bring weapons in and stockpile them, warehouse them there so they can keep feeding them into the front, that lends itself to another conclusion. And then the answer came this week, and it just blinding flash of the obvious. What Russia did was create the perception of a safe haven in Western Ukraine. See, if Russia had acted decisively early on, these warehouses, these defense industrial facilities would have been built in NATO, as they were early on. They were doing the rehab facilities. Everything was being done in NATO, and that's untouchable. It gives Ukraine this strategic depth. But NATO is seeking to push this stuff into Ukraine. But in order to do that, you have to create the perception that Western Ukraine is strategic depth for Ukraine. And then the West deposited hundreds of billions of dollars worth of resources, weapons, warehouses, facilities, defense industrial facilities, the whole thing jammed into the West. And now it's this capability that the British in their Keep Ukraine in the Fight are emphasizing. This has now made it easy. All NATO has to do is provide the money, and they can rapidly ship weapons into the holding cells in Western Ukraine, and this war can go on forever. We can keep Ukraine in the fight. Except last week, Russia took them out. Russia came in and said, you guys thought that the Patriots in Western Ukraine had a 60% intercept rate? Try 6. And they just blew up these facilities, and they're going to continue to blow them up. All that investment is gone. And now you see the desperate. The day that happened, did you see what Zelensky did? After saying, we're going to strike Russia deep, we're doing that, he said, I need a ceasefire in the air right now. Because he just woke up and said, I lost everything. And NATO can't replicate that. There isn't a plan B. There's no NATO facilities that can replace this. They're gone. And this is the reality that Europe's waking up to right now, that there ain't nothing they can do about this. Russia just dramatically changed the calculus of this game, which is why all of a sudden Ushkakov's like, yeah, we're talking. I think there's going to be a peace deal. Well, why? Because Europe doesn't have any cards left. Trump dumped everything on Europe. Europe's plan was predicated on being able to transfer weapons to a Western Ukrainian safe haven and have defense industry work that up in there. That's gone. Europe has no plan B. And they're all sitting there just swinging in the wind right now. And Russia's like, yeah, that northern Pokrovsk offensive you guys did, it's over. We won. You're all dead. And we've resumed the offensive there. The drone wall you built, all the drone operators that operate, they're dead. We killed them all, and we've reasserted drone dominance. Sumi, you guys fought us to us. Oh, last time I checked, we're advancing south there. We're advancing everywhere. You've run out of men. Your strategic reserve died north of Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk is getting ready to fall. Kupiansk is getting ready to fall. This is the reality. And I think what you're going to see is that Trump is going to go to the Europeans and go to the Ukrainians and say, I've washed my hands of this. You're on your own. It ain't going so well, is it? Tomahawks? Oh, yeah, you'll get the Tomahawk. 2028, 2029. 2030, maybe we'll give you 3, 4, 5 of them. Yeah, but don't worry, you'll get them, but you won't be alive because you're dying right now. It's over. Energy killed. The winter is going to suck. And I think what we're seeing right now is Trump's played a game. And Clay Collas caught on. I mean, you should have seen. Did you watch that interview when she came to the microphone? You know, this woman who says, my job is to dismantle Russia, to make Putin lick my boots and the whole world. She came and Zelensky's out there doing a dance about how, Trump loves him. He loves me. He loves me. No, he doesn't. She said, Trump just washed his hands of you and he put all the burden on us and we can't do it. And this is back when she thought she had a Western Ukrainian enclave. It's gone, wiped out. That's why I think you're seeing this new air of optimism out of Moscow, and they're not cocky about it. The Russians aren't running around doing a victory dance. Very measured words, but Ushakov's statement says everything. Ryabkov came out, sort of hinted that, all the momentum out of Alaska's gone, and Ushakov's like, we're talking. Everything's cool. Don't worry about it. I'm optimistic because ain't nothing going Europe's way, ain't nothing going Ukraine's way, and everything's going Russia. Well, Scott, what about the blown up refineries? You never did anything in war, did you? You've never fought a war in your life, because if you think that a war is 100% one way, it isn't. But the Ukrainians aren't doing strategic damage to Russia. What about the lines of cars at gas stations? Ain't happening. What about all the bad stuff? Ain't happening. Look, I'm going to Moscow next week. I'm confident the Moscow Odyssey will be a thriving metropolis, just like the Moscow that Ray saw in May, populated by people that are concerned about the war. You would be inhuman not to be, but who aren't losing sleep over it, who don't believe. You can have Gilbert Doctorow come on and talk all he wants about the whispering class, the elites, the politically inclined, and they want Putin gone. Never in the history of the world has there been a coup effort against a leader who enjoys 80% approval rating. Vladimir Putin is the most popular president in Russian history, for a reason, because he's kicking ass across the board. Russia's back. They've learned to fall in love with Russia again. They're proud of who they are. They're proud of the direction they're going. They are proud of what they have accomplished, and they have confidence in their army to continue this fight. And the other people that say that there's a split between the general staff and Putin don't know what the general staff is and doesn't understand who Vladimir Putin is. There's no split between these two men. They're on the same page. The proof is in exactly what's happening right now. A confluence of military action and diplomatic action leading to the result that Vladimir Putin said will always be from day one of this conflict, a war that ends on terms dictated by Russia that are acceptable to Russia.
Yeah, Ray, let's get you in here to talk about
I would agree
your
with
assessment.
Unmuted now?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
Please jump in.
No, I think Scott is right. What I'd say about this putative influence of the Russian military or the hardliners or people who are allegedly getting Putin upset by saying, you should go faster, why don't you? How can you accept these insults, these zigzagamy from Trump? I don't see that either, but I do see the military role to say, look, Mr. President Putin, we look at facts. We don't look at projections, and the facts are that Germany and the U.S. have agreed to put medium-range ballistic missiles in Germany next year. That was a side agreement. Very, very odd. It came at the NATO meeting in Washington a year and a half ago. Is that going to happen? Well, if Trump allows that to happen, I don't know about mouths, then you have what really matters to Russia besides the acceptance of the SALT provisions for another year. That's, I think, primary. Now they worry about what used to be, before Scott Ritter verified the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, agreed to by Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in 1987, and absconded from, so to speak, by Trump himself in 2019. That destroyed a whole class of nuclear medium-range ballistic missiles, unprecedented in the history of the world, destroying all these people, all these missiles in place. So what am I saying? I'm saying that this threat comes to mind. I think one reason why the Russians are playing the game of saying, "Oh no, that'd be terrible, don't do that," because the Tomahawk was one of those missiles disabled or dismantled or broken up or chopped up under the INF Treaty. And so what happened? Now, I want to give this for instance. In the Bronx, we say, I'll give you a for instance, okay? People don't much know about this, but it's important. Right before, 2 months before the special military operation, namely on December the 21st, I'll get my things right, 2021, Putin, before all his assembled generals and admirals, says this. Pay attention, please, because this is on the final. U.S. missile sites already in Romania and Poland can launch offensive strike weapons. If hypersonic, they can reach Moscow 5 minutes. Next sentence. The U.S. will give hypersonic missiles to Ukraine. Hypersonic weapons to Ukraine, end quote. Whoa. Now, that was December 21st. Now, I'm talking about the military intelligence people who look at capabilities and not intentions, okay? And I don't know what happened, but on the 30th of December, Putin called the White House and said, look, I need to speak with President Biden immediately. Now, Biden, to his credit, took the call. And Putin said, look, we're about to enter negotiations in Geneva as prearranged. It would be really helpful if you decided not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, as they already could be in Poland and Romania. And what was the response? Here it is. From Biden, Washington has no intention to deploy offensive strike weapons in Ukraine. December 30, end quote. December 30, 2021. December 31st, Ushakov. Moscow is pleased beyond measure. The U.S. is finally acknowledging Russia's security concerns. As a matter of fact, that move acknowledged about 5 of the 8 provisions in that treaty that Moscow wanted the U.S. and NATO to sign. So what happens next? Oh, wow. What happens at the Geneva meetings between Wendy Sherman and Ryabkov? Okay, that's the 9th and the 10th of January. So less than 2 weeks later. Oh, Wendy doesn't have any instructions about what you say Biden promised? First I've heard of that. Okay, on the 21st of January, finally Lavrov finds out where Blinken is. He happens to be in Geneva. He said, "Hey, what about that promise?" And Lavrov says, "Forget it." Lavrov asks Blinken. Blinken says, "What? Forget about it. We weren't with the president when he made that promise. So, but when you say he made that promise, now we can put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine anytime we want. Anytime the Ukrainians ask that, they will ask us. We'll talk about maybe limiting the number of them or something like that." That's the 21st of January. On the 12th of February, the last talk between Biden and Putin. Ushakov's readout. the U.S. gave no meaningful response on the deployment of strike missiles systems in Ukraine or on NATO expansion. Now, what I'm saying here is that, look, Biden may not have been really in control of his people, but to the degree that precedent is set, that underlings can undercut the president on an important promise like this. No offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. My God! So that's one of the more little known but really important. What's the word? Deceptions that the U.S. has exercised in relations with Russia. Now, Russia sees a new kind of leader. They think it's more a hope than a thought that they can deal with Trump. I think they're willing to be very gingerly and not alienate him. But I think in the final analysis, this is the only prudent course because, as Putin made very clear in Valdai, we're winning, for God's sake. We're winning. And he actually discerned the fronts, the North Front, the Middle Front, in which we're winning. And so it's a matter of time in Ukraine. And if there's no agreement, well, we still want to make sure that you and the Germans don't put middle or intermediate range ballistic missiles in Germany, for God's sake. Forget about it. You agree, Scott?
Let me add this. It's not just what we want. We don't have any missiles to deploy to Germany. The Dark Eagle is a joke. It's a failure. It doesn't work. I think in December they did a test. It's not out of the original launcher, but they did a test. They did the whole system check, and the missile launched and it went out and hit. But the report from the Pentagon is that it's not lethal. The Dark Eagle system, and it's a very expensive system, doesn't kill the target it's supposed to aim at. They can't establish lethality factors. Another thing is the system hasn't been gone through the whole survivability thing. One of the things that we've learned watching the Ukraine conflict is the Russians shoot down HIMARS missiles, they shoot down ATACMS missiles, they shoot down glide bombs, they shoot down everything, and they jam everything. The U.S. is saying that everything we send in that requires GPS or some sort of is jammed by the Russians. Dark Eagle, in order to do this thing, it's a two-stage system, releases this glide vehicle that then comes in from Mach 17, slows down to Mach 5, maneuvers, and hits. All that maneuvering is done because there's a whole bunch of electronics inside there that say maneuver, do this, photograph, da-da-da. None of that's been hardened. They haven't tested it. And the Russians will just put up one of their electronic warfare things and go beep, and there goes Dark Eagle into the down. Dark Eagle doesn't work, can't survive, and doesn't kill. Right now, I think the earliest Dark Eagle can be deployed as a system is 2027. And that's probably going to slip even more because it just doesn't work. So I think that's another reality is that, this pressure, this timeline of, we're going to deploy Dark Eagle to Germany sometime in the summer of 2026. I don't think that's going to happen. And that sort of takes some pressure off too. And I don't know if Dark Eagle's ever going to work because the moment you start hardening that hypersonic warhead, you start changing things. There's only so much space inside it. And the materials that are used to absorb the heat and allow it to maneuver, you start playing with that and you got a whole different warhead design. And off you go back to the design board, and it's going to take Boeing and everybody else years before they can adapt to this. So I think that's another reason. The Russians aren't stupid. Everything I'm telling you comes from open sources. The Russians follow open sources as well as we do. And I think the Russians probably have their own sources. And I just don't see the Russians panicking about Dark Eagle. They prefer the United States not do it. Politically, they would encourage the United States to decouple itself from the commitment that was made about Dark Eagle. But the fact is, just like the Tomahawk, it's a threat that just isn't going to manifest itself, not anytime soon.
Great points.
Let me add just one thing here. Paper Tiger has come to the fore again. The Chinese used to call the Russians a paper tiger 5 decades ago, and call us a paper tiger. Well, I just have to say that I've been around a long time. I've never seen a situation where the Russians outstrip us in everything but the most sophisticated strategic weaponry. This is, I just asked Scott to confirm this. In other words, when Putin couldn't get any movement to negotiate these things or delimit them in the middle of, 2014, 2015, he said, look, we're going to go do it all ourselves, and now they have. So would it be fair to say, Scott, that on every level except the nuclear strategic, maybe, let's leave that one alone. On every other level militarily, the Russians are stronger than we are?
I would say on every level they are. Let me just put out this reality. The Minuteman III is a system that's long outlived its utility, supposed to be replaced by the Sentinel missile. When they announced the Sentinel missile, I took one look at that program, and having been in the missile inspection business, which means that I was thoroughly familiar with Morton Thiokol, with the former Hercules plant. I know how we build missiles. I know what goes into it. I know missile design. I know the whole thing. I looked at it and I said, this is never going to work. The timelines are unrealistic. Everything, the new technologies, the Sentinel they're going to build isn't going to fit into a Minuteman silo, and the budget doesn't include new silos. And you're never going to be able to build this missile. It's going to last forever. This is a program that's going to go on until 2050, 2060, and it's going to cost us over $1 trillion by the time it's done. And people listening, come on, Scott, you're just an old curmudgeon. You don't know what you're talking about. Congress just pretty much canceled Sentinel missile this year because it doesn't fit in the silo and it costs too much. And it's, they had to put something in the way it works is when you let a contract out, as the contract goes, if the price spikes, Congress stops to prevent what's happened in the past, where F-35 programs take on a life of their own. And so the Sentinel program spiked right from the beginning, as I knew it would, because it's just a stupid missile. And they shut it down. They reconfigured, they relet contracts, released contractors, and then it went again, and all of a sudden, spike, shut it down. Congress went, screw it. Now they're extending the Minuteman III until 2050 because we can't produce. Meanwhile, the Russians are looking at the Yars missile, which is they just put out, and they're going, nah, we need something better. We're going to call it the Cedar. We're going to do the Cedar missile. And why don't we try some innovative stuff? Because the United States is talking about putting drones out there that are going to fly in the vicinity of our launches and try and shoot us in the boost phase. How do we defeat the boost phase? What if we build a solid rocket engine that has the ability to alter its trajectory, launch fast, then slow down and launch and maneuver? And this is going to require some new fuels and some composites and all this. And why don't we get it done in a year and a half? And they did.
Did they?
Oh, yeah. They're launching it now. The Russians, their system works. It just works. They got these experts that are crazy experts. I mean, these guys are just genius. The Moscow Institute for Thermal Technology used to be called the Nadaradze Design Bureau. These are guys who designed the SS-20, SS-25, the Topol M, Yars, Cedar, Oreshnik. These are the guys that are just, they're good. And they just sit there and they design it. And then they have all around them, they have the guys who do solid rocket motors, the guys that do composites. And they just come up with ideas. They talk to each other. And next thing you know, weird things are happening. We don't understand Oreshnik. Because, and again, Theodore Postal is a man who I have nothing but the highest respect for. He's 20 times smarter than me, which is why he's an MIT professor. And he is not a fan of Oreshnik. He is done. I've read his stuff, and I can't counter it. He uses physics. There's certain laws attached to physics. You can't make up physics. And he says it can do X, Y, and Z. And yet, I'm looking at certain Russian institutes that are peripherally linked to this. institutes that get into exotic ceramics, that get into exotic chemicals, that get into nanoparticles, and suddenly we have magnesium hydrogen able to replicate a hydrogen bomb with small things. And I'm like, is there something else going on here? For instance, the Oreshnik that Russia fired into Dnipro were these inert rounds because they came in hot, but they didn't blow up. But Putin's sitting there going, nah, we fire one of these and it's going to have the equivalent of a nuclear bomb, the devastation that's done. And Theodore's going, that ain't the equivalent, and you can't get it with that. Something seems to be missing from this equation. And I'm just saying that the Russians are so far ahead of where we are and how we think and what we do, that, they're better than we are. And the sad thing is we are so corrupt. Our defense industry has stopped being about providing the best weapons for the American warfighter and about how to make as much money for the, to the shareholder. We are broke. We are fundamentally broke. And again, Ted Postal did this. He brought to our attention, I'm sure you saw the article, Ray, about the contract for Golden Dome. It's a $150 billion giveaway. And the way the contract's written is, we're going to give you $150 billion, and you don't have to do a damn thing. Literally, don't do anything.
Just think.
You don't have to deliver anything.
Money.
You don't have to write anything down. You don't have to do anything. But we hope at the end you'll build the best defense system in the world. But we're tired. See, what happened is the defense industry said, like the Sentinel, hey, come on, our model is to bid low. You guys do it, and then we raise the price. And so by the time it's done, you're paying, 100 times more per missile, and that's how we make money. And Congress said no, and put that cap on the spike. And so now the way they've gotten around is they've let a contract that says, here's $150 billion. Don't do anything. You don't have to do. Literally, the contract says that. For 10 years. They don't have to do anything. No deliverables, no plans, no oversight, no Congress, no nothing. $150 billion giveaway. That's our system. I can guarantee you this. If the general staff and the presidency said, we need a missile that does X, Y, and Z, and they turned that concept loose on Russian defense industry, in 2 years, you'd have a missile that does X, Y, and Z. And it would be under cost. That's a system that works. And this is where we're going to lose it, guys, because we become so corrupt. Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, the corruption of that has come to roost. We have $1 trillion military that can't do squat, and it's only going to get worse. Maybe Pete Hegseth can get people to do pull-ups and sit-ups and all that stuff, but the weapons they're going to be using ain't going to work.
That was.
Hey, Scott, you're forgetting the F-35.
Oh no, I didn't. I just didn't want to remember it.
Tell us what the government just did about the F-35.
Well, maybe you know something I don't.
No, it was something to the effect that, we're closing that program down. It doesn't really meet the specifications.
Yeah. Same thing we did with the F-22. I mean, you talk to all these, Air Force guys, and they're like, F-22, F-35. I mean, it just, we flip them up. They go like this, and they're great because they're American planes. I'm Top Gun. I can do it all. Maverick and Iceman and Goose. And the F-22 program got shut down because it sucks. And the F-35 program just got shut down because it sucks. And what do we have? More programs that suck. The smart move right now, if I were the Secretary of Defense, is I'd shut one of these advanced, Gen 5, Gen 6 airplanes down. And I'd just say, make the F-18 better and make the F-15 better. If there's a way you can breathe life into the F-16, do it. Proven airframes, proven designs. We don't need all this fancy crap. We just need planes to take off, shoot down other planes, bomb targets, and do the thing that we can afford. Because we can't afford this anymore. I mean, it's crazy. The F-35 doesn't work. People don't talk about it. One day, the after report will be written about the Israeli Air Force and how much this war cost them. Every time that plane takes off, the radar absorbent material, which is highly classified, we're not allowed to talk about it, it peels off. It flies through weather, sand, all this. So when it lands, it has to be retreated. And that's a whole process, and it costs a lot of money. Nobody talks about it.
So we need more push-ups and we more less hair
Pull-ups.
on our face, and otherwise we'll be all
No
right.
beards. No beards.
Well, no, this has been very, very educational for me because I'm been around for a while, and the U.S. has always been superior in at least the strategic area, and that's no longer the case. And you could talk about the hegemon descending and losing influence and all, but if the same is true with respect to the comparison with the Russian military, people have to realize that, and that's why I really appreciate programs like yours, Danny. Well, we can talk about this stuff freely, and I can ask innocent or not so innocent questions and get the real poop from somebody who knows which end is up.
Yeah, very true. I know I've kept you guys for quite a while, you all, and I really enjoyed that last part there. I just want to pull one thing up if you guys wanted to comment on this before we head out of here. Wanted to pull this up because it really does. This is Haaretz. It really does back up what you're saying, what you've said, Scott, and you, Ray. Even if it loses governance of Gaza, Hamas has achieved its goal. And I want to just pull up what those achievements are according to Haaretz. This is actually just breaking. It's ending with two major achievements. First, restoring the topic of Palestinians to the global agenda. And then the second is emptying out Israel's prisons, which they full of Palestinians, mind you, which is a huge point for them, for the Palestinian people, one of the biggest demands, and they have won it. So any final thoughts on this, or any thoughts on this? Because it kind of makes the point that there was a lot of resistance that bore out, I think, a lot of results. Scott?
I said at the beginning, I'll say it again, Hamas won. I know there's people in your chat who disagree with me, think I'm crazy. I don't care. Maybe I am crazy, and you have every right to disagree with me, but I'm right on this one. I was right when I spelled out Hamas's objectives right after October 7th. I said, this is why they're doing it. This is how they're going to do it. I said they're going to suck Israel in and get Israel to commit mass murder at that time. Very controversial thing to say, because, oh my God, that means Hamas is facilitating. Yes, Hamas sacrificed the people of Gaza to get a Palestinian state. Just like Charles de Gaulle sacrificed tens of thousands of French civilians so the Allies could land at Normandy and begin the process of liberating France from Nazi Germany. It's horrible, horrible. But Hamas did it, and now they've won. They're on the path to victory. And I think Haaretz captures that perfectly.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that before you come in, right, for the final comment. Not only do I agree with that, Scott, it also stands to reason that Palestinians themselves and those who we have to remember that Hamas has been the governing party in Gaza, and far more popular than the so-called Palestinian Authority. And for many in the resistance, the vision of any other option was not really there, because, as so many commentators have said, resistance has exhausted all of the options, and this was the one that they took to achieve their goals, and they're well on their way. Ray, your thoughts?
I don't really have much to add on that particular issue. I guess I come across as more skeptical as to whether Netanyahu and the others will live up to their part of the deal. We'll just have to see. I'd like to revisit this in about 2 weeks to see how things eventuate. I don't think Netanyahu would hesitate from violating his terms, even though the deal bears the imprint of the signature of Trump. What the only kind of right thing I could see in this is that if it holds, then Trump is sitting pretty, and he might have more latitude to move on things like getting really decent talk going with Russia on things that's so ripe for resolution that might enable him to do that. That's the only thing I can see if the deal holds. and I'll just let it rest at that.
Careful, Ray. You're sounding a lot like a MAGA guy. Trump has you wrapped around his little finger, Ray. You're sitting there stroking the Donnie baby. I'm just reading the comments.
I put my MAGA hat over here so nobody can see it. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Danny. This is really good.
For that comment too, Scott. It's like, sometimes there are circumstances that move well beyond the personalities and whatnot of our U.S. political class that I think we illuminated pretty well here. That
just the idea of Ray McGovern being a MAGA is
right.
And yet, because of what he just said, there are comments in your chat that Ray McGovern's been sold out, bought by MAGA, because he dares speak realistically. I mean,
mea culpa, mea maxima culpa.
The Scarlet Badge, right? Well, gentlemen, this was great. We'll head off together. I just want to point to the video description where you can find Substack, you can find Scott's YouTube channel, you can find Ray's Twitter X account. You can also find Garland Nixon, who was here with us early, had to leave after the hour. You can find his YouTube channel. Anything else you guys I'm missing about sharing regarding sharing?
No, thank you very much. I'm going to reiterate, this has been a very valuable program. I think anybody who saw it and listened, learned. So thank you very much, Danny. And I would just add, support Danny Dhaiphong. I mean, thank you for saying support me and support Ray and support Garland, but support Danny Dhaiphong. You're the one who put the show together, and people, if they want to have similar programs of this nature, throw the support behind Danny. But thanks for inviting me.
Of course, appreciate it always. So everyone, you heard Scott. Hit the like button. That is a big way to support. If you can't do it financially, but if you can do it financially, Patreon, Substack, and so much more are in the video description too. With all that said, everyone, I'm over and out. I'll be on Sunday with John Kiriakou and Joe Loria, so friends from Consortium News, who I know you both have done a lot of work with. So let's get out of here. Take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.